my book will serve very little purpose if it's read by people who think like me and have greater support for their views.
Yes.
Yeah. But if it's read by at least a few people who do not think like me and that prompts them to question some of their own beliefs. I'm not saying change their beliefs, but question some of those beliefs and say, what's the foundation for those beliefs? Are those beliefs based in data or broad principles or what? Or what does it say about the values that express those beliefs?
Sure.
I think then the book's playing a role that it should.
The Teamwork Arts Podcast, ladies and gentlemen, this is where we try and go behind the thoughts that animate the actions of those who create the arts. Today, of course, it is an honor to have someone whose detailed description would probably take a podcast all in itself.
You should skip it.
Let's just call it the captain, one of the captains of the industry. I think suffice it to say that Mr. Naushad Forbes is with us. Thank you very much for your time, sir.
My pleasure, Sarthak. Great to be here.
You've, of course, finally traversed the journey of the authors towards to being an author as well. How's that journey been?
So, I wrote a book together with a friend 20 years ago.
Right.
It was a very academic book.
Right.
And I recommend it very highly for anyone who suffers from insomnia. But not to anyone else. It's a tough, dense book.
Right.
Somewhere along the way in the last 5 years, I've started writing a monthly column in the newspapers.
Right.
And the response that I had to that column has been very positive, number one. Number two, I've learned, I think, a lot. I've always enjoyed writing, right through college, in the company, in general. So I've generally been a big reader, and
Sure.
I've also written a reasonable amount. But writing a book really was something that I started thinking about as a part of this column. The column helped me also be clear, because if you have 1,000 words in which you have to say something, then you better be clear what you want to say, because otherwise you won't say anything.
Absolutely.
So, and I think that improved my writing significantly, actually, writing that column.
Right.
And then started working on the book actually in the early days of the pandemic, because it was a great opportunity to actually stay at home, not travel, and focus on writing. And I enjoyed the process immensely, actually. I enjoyed writing the book.
And I think, the pandemic, I think, taught us to look inward a little, to find those small joys that we had sort of forgotten in the bigger picture in that sense. And of course, your picture is so much bigger than those the others that you look at with your various responsibilities you're fulfilling. But was it an enjoyable process, or was that a little bit of a...
So when I first started, I said, how am I going to write the whole book? But I had an idea of what each chapter would be about. And I figured that some of the chapters would be easier, some of the chapters would require more work.
Right.
So for example, somewhere along the way, I said, I don't think I'm going to write the chapter on institutions, because it's not a subject that I've ever thought about much or written about ever in the past.
Sure.
And then I was talking to a friend of mine who's a historian and a very accomplished writer. And he said, look, if you leave the institutions chapter out, you're actually weakening the book and the story.
Okay.
So you must put it in.
Right.
And in the end, so I did more reading and work on the institutions chapter than for any of the other chapters in the book. It was huge learning, and I am really happy with how the chapter turned out.
Sure.
So there are, you have certain favorites. And those favorites are the ones that I sort of enjoyed writing more.
Sure.
But sometimes the ones that took more work and, more effort to really think through in terms of what I wanted to say and how to say it and support it, that is what has given me the greatest pleasure later on when I look back on the book and I say, yeah, I'm saying something useful here.
Sure. There's also the fact that, you more than a lot of other people would understand the importance of fact and of making sense of chaos in that way. as far as the book is concerned, there is, of course, the academic rigor part of it, but there's also the creative chaos part of it, because at the end of the day, it needs to necessarily tell a story as well. So was that a difficult balancing act for you, or did you put one above the other?
So I first wrote the chapters and sort of said, here's my data, here's what I want to say, etc. And then I had a couple of very good readers. This friend of mine who's a historian, my niece, who was an extremely insightful and valuable reader of the book, and gave me very valuable feedback, both detailed and general. And then I would go back through the chapters and say, in fact, what I tried to do was to reduce the size of each chapter. And by reducing the size of each chapter, what's the phrase that's used? You kill your darlings or whatever, right? So you have your favorite bits, and sometimes things that you'd spend a lot of time working on. And you said, actually, but the chapter reads better without that. And you could only get rid of it at least 1 month on, because because otherwise you remember the pain of what it took to get all that data put together and put it in, and then this doesn't. The broader story is what needs to matter, and if it doesn't support the broader story, put it somewhere else, use it in a different book.
Which leads me to the question that, of course, you've put together a bit of an academic tome in that way, where facts are important. But increasingly, we're living in times where facts, information is being crowbarred sort of into boxes of agendas, and you being more so, your voice being a very influential voice. Was there a little bit of second guessing in putting information into what was going under your name?
Well, I suppose everyone picks and goes looking for data that supports their own theories.
Exactly.
I think really good academics go and generate the data and then tell the story that the data is telling.
Right.
But I wouldn't claim that. I mean, I would say that, I think I had a point of view, but as I looked at the data, if the data didn't support my point of view, I would actually say that in the chapter. And I'll try to qualify it or whatever. And in some cases, for example, in the chapter on openness and so on, trade, I talk a little bit about two sides of a position, but two sides which are both very well substantiated.
Right.
And then I say where I come out on it. So in terms of this is what I think at the end of the day, and this is why I think it. So I try to support. I've tried to support what I argue with as much either sort of broader principles from different fields or data.
There's a quote that stayed with me for a while of someone who I know, who said that we're living in times when we're not listening, we're waiting. At a time when everything is being sort of given an agenda, we're becoming a bit of a. Would you agree that we're becoming a bit of a society of the ors rather than the ands? You have to be this or that, or rather than being this and that. And you've written something where you've actually tried to argue both the points. So was that a bit of a tussle?
It wasn't a tussle, actually. I believe very strongly, and some of the people I'm closest to, my brother, for example, believes this very strongly too, that one of the greatest problems of our times is polarization. And this whole, you're either with us or you're against us, and if you're against us, I'm not going to read you, hear you, anything. And even if you're not against us in practice, if I think you're against us, I won't read you or hear you or anything. So, I think that's too bad, because I think newspapers in the past used to play a role of exposing people to different points of view, which they do. Some good newspapers still do. Business Standard, where I write, does. The Hindu does. The Indian Express does. Not too many others.
Sure.
You know, there are a few others like Mint and all, but not too many others.
Sure. There's also this thing about information and knowledge, that increasingly information has overtaken our lives in that way, and that is passive because it's everywhere. Knowledge traditionally has been something that is an active pursuit, where you have to pick information and then create knowledge out of it
and create understanding.
And that line seems to be blurring a little, where information is being now increasingly masquerading as knowledge. Do you think that's a threat to the proliferation of ideas, to maybe creativity itself?
It's a good question. I don't know. Is it a threat to ideas and creativity? Maybe not. Maybe not. But it's certainly a threat to understanding.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yes, of course.
So you know, in terms of appreciating what we are each saying, you know, and you know, I mean, my book will serve very little purpose if it's read by people who think like me,
right,
and have greater support for their views.
Yes.
Yeah. But if it's read by at least a few people who do not think like me, and that prompts them to question some of their own beliefs. I'm not saying change their beliefs, but question some of those beliefs and say, what's the foundation for those beliefs? Are those beliefs based in data or broad principles or what? Or what does it say about the values that express those beliefs?
Sure.
I think then the book's playing a role that it should.
Of course, that makes perfect sense, actually. And finally, to those who are sort of on the edge but still a little afraid of taking that plunge of putting the word to paper, which is a plunge that you've so joyfully taken, what would your advice be?
Start writing, right? Start writing, because if you start writing, don't expect that when you start writing, the first thing that you write is going to be wonderful. The first thing you write, possibly, even you won't understand when you read it, right? I mean, because you say, what am I saying here? Why am I saying this? You know, that's what I intended to say.
For sure.
And it's a very good learning process. So if you go through again what you've written and then keep writing, I found it was much easier to write, you know, chapters 9, 10, 11 than to write chapters 2, 3, and 4.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Chapter 1 was easy, but 2, 3, and 4 was a struggle. Chapters 9, 10, 11 was a breeze, and I was really enjoying it, and I could have kept going if I'd wanted to really upset my publisher, because I was at that point, you know, I was supposed to deliver 65,000 words and I delivered 95,000 words. So, I mean, you know, and I think the final discussion was, okay, don't cross 100,000. But I was enjoying the process a lot. Sure. And I think you get better with practice.
Sure. Of course.
It's the way most things in the world work, including writing.
And that's life advice as well. You get better with practice. Be not afraid to try. And of course, it has been a breeze reading the book, The Struggle and the Promise. That's a book that Mr. Naushad Forbes has written. You might want to read it because it makes you think, and thinking is a lovely thing to do.
And, you know, I also had fun with it, right? So, you know, so that's why there are Lakshman cartoons in the book.
Sure.
You know, especially when I'm talking about particularly sensitive points, they're more cartoons.
Of course.
You know,
makes it go down easy.
There are sides in the footnotes.
Right.
So that bit was a lot of fun.
Absolutely. So remember to have fun, and remember to read the book, and remember to tell us what you think about the Teamwork Arts podcast. Follow us on social media, leave us likes, comments, etc., whatever it is. And remember to think about what Mr. Forbes has said, because thinking, as I said, is good. Just might open a few doors. Thank you very much, Mr. Forbes, for this time. That's the
Thank you, Sarthak.
Thank you so much. That's Teamwork Arts podcast, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for listening.
If you've enjoyed this podcast, subscribe to our channel now. We have a new episode out every Friday.